So today, we want to reflect on a tool that I've developed perhaps 15 years ago. It was a time when I was leading leadership programs and top talent programs, and I developed the second or the third module in this 9 months program where I'd have often a group of 15 or 20 or 25 leaders with me in the aggregate, sometime for 9 or 10 days, a bit like the experience that you have had actually, but the focus was not so much on strategy and innovation, more on their own development. And so I decided that I could fly under the corporate radar, a special program designed purely to help them design their personal future. Mm. And I actually called it Create Your Future, which is years before Create New Futures was written. And I forgot all about it when I wrote this book. I only discovered later that the names were almost identical. It's just curious. And into that module that was called Create Your Future, I wanted to build a particular framework that will give them as much power, as much information in terms of their own self-navigation and the way they were going to design their future. Part of the exercise was design the next 10, the next 5 years. Today, it's very difficult if you say to people, design 10 years from now what your life will look like. And I still think there is value in asking the question, because it will tease certain elements that you can think into and explore. So anyway, a part of that program was this idea of the 10 stages of life, and I'm going to bring it on screen in a minute. And I thought it would be relevant for us to explore, because we are interested in our dialogue in this, what we call the golden years, the transition years, so the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. How do we make these years as meaningful, as powerful, as liberating, as purposeful and intentional as can be, really defying this idea that you finished your corporate role and now you're retiring and now you're beginning to go downhill. No, there's no need to go downhill. You can go on the plateau, or you can go uphill, or you can choose to go downhill, but in yourself, you have the capacity to continue to evolve, to continue to grow, to continue to go up your own hill, the mountain of your life, whatever that means for you. And if you don't like the metaphor of the mountain for the shape of the journey you are creating for yourself, then create whatever metaphor you like. Maybe you are going on a hike for a beautiful lake or a beautiful place where there is an amazing vista, whatever metaphor. Actually, it's useful to practice with these metaphors. So let me bring this on screen and we can take a look at this. So this was called The Journey Through Life's 10 Stages. And you and I discussed before we turned the recording on this idea of the earlier years, the infant stage, especially the child and the adolescent stages. And you were suggesting that maybe this can be broken into 2. And I said, actually, this can be broken into 7. There are actually 7, right, because every year so much happens. And the adolescent can easily be broken into 3 or 4 categories: the 9 to 12, the 12 to 15 or 16, the 16 to 21. And if you wanted to be more detailed, you'd break it even further. And we're not doing it here because actually the accent here is more on the adult growth and development. If we want to come back another time to do the exploration of this, then we can and we will. For now, I think we will keep it at that, because what we're interested is to then really explore what happens when you go beyond 21. Before we go into the content, any opening comments from yourself, and what would you add to what I just said there in terms of how we are approaching this?
So I've opened up my phone and I'm looking at the feedback that I sent you the last time we chatted. And one perspective that is not covered in your nature and character of stage is to talk a little bit about the development of spirituality and a sense of the greater cosmos. And so I didn't know if that was an angle, a characteristic, a perspective that you also wanted to touch on. So when I sent you my feedback, in addition to dividing things up, and I certainly understand why we're not going to do that, and it makes total and perfect sense to me, I did add some comments for each stage around spirituality and religion.
Yeah, so they're interesting. And the reason I initially never included something like this is because A, I did this in a corporate context.
Yeah.
But B, I felt that these would very much be influenced by the setup in the upbringing, and I didn't know that they would be always as universal as you could make the case about the other elements here. Mm-hmm. Number one. Number two, there is information, by the way, similar to this, but not as complete, I felt, which was one of the reasons I needed to create this tool. And you shared with me a couple of months ago something that you were looking at. Mm-hmm. And so I felt that I needed to create something more comprehensive. I'm happy that we talk, as we talk through this, you bring the dimension of spirituality. You see, religion is more what you're educated to from your parents, from your environment. Spirituality, if we choose to embrace the broadest definition, which is your experience of yourself inside the cosmos, and the map of meaning and interpretation you offer to that experience, then I'm perfectly fine to explore with adding the dimension of spirituality into this. And this by no means is trying to be a complete map. This is a good starter, a rough extrapolation, building on work done by others, but trying to carve a certain focus. Mm-hmm. With the main emphasis for me is the developmental accent. Because many places where you will bring up the consideration of growing through your 20s, into your 30s, into your 40s, into your 50s, there is an old paradigm that says you've gone through your upbringing, you got to 20, 21, 25, and now you're cruising. And I just never believed that to be the case. The last couple of decades proved that could never be the case. Still, I think you'd find many people that will tell you that they define themselves by the formative experience, and what they do is they fail to release themselves and empower themselves mm-hmm. to the greater freedom, liberation, and power in the sense of self-authorship that's available for them into their 30s, 40s, and 50s. All the way from how do I choose to update my beliefs and who I am in the world and how I choose to show up. So more at that belief system level, mental, philosophical level, all the way down to habits and how I use myself in the mechanics of life in all sorts of practical, all the way from diet to sports to mm-hmm. passions. The greater conviction that if you set yourself up to it and you have the purpose and the intent, you can curate, you can change, you can transform the life you live at any point. And I know you'll say to me in a minute or two, well, it's easy for you to speak. You've lived like this consciously since your 20s. Well, partly that's why I feel that I have a calling to share this point of view, because my discovery is you don't have to develop that intent in your 20s or 30s. You can discover that awareness and become conscious and intentional into your 40s and 50s and 60s. You won't necessarily have the layers, the foundations that you could have established in your 30s and 40s if you engaged with the same intention then. But there is so much that you can do, and there is so much power that's available for you. What if we started with the infant stage,
Right,
which we frame here as birth to 2, and I put the silver there because I needed more section than the rainbow. And silver is between silver and gold. Gold, we call the late years the golden years, and we can call the birthing years the silver years.
there you go.
Because it's the quick metal. So silver, so birth, where the central theme is, what is this world? What is this place I've just arrived at? And if you read, please, and make some comments on the nature and character of that stage.
Right. So I didn't necessarily have a lot to add here, other than it's worth noting that the infant doesn't have a discernible understanding of spirituality in the greater cosmos, right? So when we're born, we are really sort of, like you said, blindly feeling our way. And so a sense of self beyond what I can, my 5 senses does not really exist. At least we don't think that it does, right?
Correct. So that's why I've always believed that if I needed to frame or answer the following question, what is the first accompanying presence? What is the first nature that accompanies birth? I would say trust, because in the consciousness of the womb experience, there is the clairvoyant knowing that baby is going to come into a world where there is 100% dependency on the adults. There is the knowledge that, unlike a deer, if you've seen a deer, a little deer comes out, which is a beauty to behold, it needs to run like almost instantly. Because if it doesn't run, it's not going to survive. Mm-hmm. Why in the evolutionary biology, the case is not the same for the human? Because the human needed to develop in the evolutionary intent, a system that will hold a bigger head. So the head is larger, which is baby comes out able to immediately stand and sit. It needs to actually develop the strength to hold itself and learn to stand and learn to walk. So there is at the most fundamental level, that complete dependency on the adults around you and your parents, and often they're ill-equipped. So if you ask about the spiritual dimension, if there is a soul spirit that is an energetic presence that inhabits the baby still as the life-giving signal that we recognize with the extraordinary phenomenon of the quickening that occurs around the 20th week of the pregnancy, then it has the knowledge that right at birth, you will depend on others for food, warmth, and affection. And you must be able to blindly trust your parents, your caregivers, for providing these. And there is also the trust that there is everything you need in terms of the motoric and the bodily capacity to learn the skills that you need to learn in the first couple of years that will give you the mobility that you need. And the other important feature to highlight about this stage of life is something you've seen me talk to corporate executives about, the difference between the toddler's learning and adult learning, because what always inspires me so much about this stage is I could put my ear next to my son's head when he was 1 or 2 or 3, and now I do the same with my granddaughter. And I can almost hear the 3D printing that occurs in her brain, because she is immersively creating in her brain the topography of the meaning of the experience that first time she's seeing a dog, first time she's seeing a bird, first time she's touching with her feet the water of the ocean. All of those are formative experiences, and because there is still 100% plasticity in the brain, which is not available in quite the same way for us later in adulthood. But when we come to adulthood, we'll talk about the fact that we still have plasticity, and that's what people forget to remember. But in the case of the toddler's learning, it is so rapid. The assimilation of language and the assimilation of the world and the assimilation of the meaning of things. It's because the brain is enjoying still 100% plasticity. And I am prepared to also go here on a limb and say, there is also the collective know-how and the collective knowledge of the collective unconscious. If I use the Jungian term, or if I choose to talk about it more in the collective soul know-how, the soul guides the baby as he goes through those early stages, and the soul has the knowledge of orchestrating the development through crawling to standing to walking, such that it carries the potential and the intelligence of that to therefore facilitate the development in the nervous system, the brain, and the way of the orchestration of the physical, skeletal, muscular, to enable you the rapid learning that goes with learning to, for example, walk. So I'd offer that about the infant stage. So let's look at the red stage, the child. And we said at the opening, you could break those 2 to 9 to 7 different brackets. But the theme here is this is mine. There is certainly in the very early stages, there isn't yet the separation of me and the world. And everything that I touch or see or experience the child's experience at the very early years is as an extension of himself or herself. What else would you add about this mastering motor skills and learning to play and socialize and acquiring new skills and continued growth, and later around 6 and 7 entering formal schooling and organized activities, and so on? What else would you add on the early stages of the childhood and then the later stages of childhood?
A couple of things. From an early stage perspective, I think that this is when children are beginning to learn the difference between right and wrong, and the concept of what is right and what is wrong. So in terms of what they're doing early on, I would just offer up that, they're first beginning to recognize that it's not just all about them. They might not like it, they might not understand it, but I think that they're beginning to see it in some way. From a later stage perspective, sticking with kind of the theme of the cosmos, I think that children become more curious. So I know that, you know, if a child is being raised in a particular religion, the child may begin to recognize that that religion is not the only religion on the planet. And so there's, I think, a natural curiosity about being with others and how does it all fit together that I think we could potentially add into this stage. I think in terms of the other things that you wrote in later in this stage, one of the things that I wrote down was that kids will begin to design and create with more complexity and use more sophisticated tools. So 2 to 9, as we talked about, is very broad, and you know, children are creative, but the difference between a 2 to 5-year-old creating and a 6 to 9-year-old creating is very, very different. And so I would say that, you know, when I sit down with my granddaughter and she's, you know, we have a little book for her to work on over the summer.
And she is how old is she now?
And she's a little past 4. You know, she's happy to do the ABCs, recognize some words, count. But when it comes to coloring, she does not want to color inside the lines. And she is not an artist in and of herself in that regard, but she has a lot of empathy and actually even at 4 reads people pretty well. As opposed to my grandson, who is 7.5 and is very, he uses his art. You know how, like when I was a kid, I would read all the time, and that was very self-soothing behavior. My grandson likes to read, but he really uses his art to self-soothe, and he's quite a good artist, but he judges his art. He judges how good it is. Not terribly, but he does, and as opposed to the little girl who does not. And so he is much more tuned into, is it proper, is it right, is it good, than she is. And so I think that there's something around creation and design that maybe we would like to touch on in this particular stage.
Right. And again, in fairness, we're not doing here the detailed year by year of childhood, but you're drawing a clear line there where the 4-year-old is not yet as self-conscious, self-aware as the 7 or 8 or 9-year-old begins to be. And there isn't yet the separation between me and others in 3, 4, 5 as there is later in 6, 7, and 8.
Correct.
And so yes to that, and yes to the sophistication of being able to look at more inputs into a more complex picture, a more complex creativity. And I think we can also add that these are the ages where people often experience the first sense of trauma and some formative experiences in relation to that. We just had a video this morning from our granddaughter, and I think it's the first time she had a chance to interact with a dog. They have a cat at home, but they are on a vacation, and there was a dog, and she is immediately touching and playing with the dog, which is so beautiful because she is next to her mom, and she is, at this point, everything in her world is completely safe. And it's so wonderful, and I hope it goes for as long as it can go on, but there isn't yet risk or danger or something to be afraid of, certainly not pets, certainly not a dog or a cat. So somewhere along these ages, into the red, the 2 to 9, there will be the recognition of danger, of threat. There will be the earlier experiences of amygdala kicking in with, should I be afraid? Should I not be afraid? Which is partly the other side of what you called right and wrong, because partly how you learn right and wrong is through this. You will do certain things and your parents will tell you no, and it will be abrupt because they essentially want to protect you. So there is wrong as in the sense of this is wrong because it can kill you and therefore we must protect you. And there is a different wrong that begins to appear through socialization, which is this is not nice to hurt another child. And we don't do that. So this is where the different layers of that experience and some of the socialization cues are constructive and liberating, and some are perhaps arresting and prematurely introducing self-criticism and self-judgment to hold a 7 or an 8-year-old from exploring freely with his art. So these are very interesting dimensions to explore and to reflect on. Obviously, an important element is learning the aspect of control, controlling desires, controlling certain bodily functions in the most basic way. All that is part of the development of the child inside a family and inside the context of being part of the social arrangement. We are a social creature. The human is a social creature. And so much of our development and personal evolution involves that dimension. So a rich space to explore there. If we then look at the exciting discovery years that we named here, the orange stage, the adolescence of 9 to 21, which again, we wanted to be purist. We will do 9 to 11 or 9 to 12. We'll then do 12 to 15. We'll then do 16 to maybe 19, then do 19 to 21, 22. So, I mean, the different ways you can, but I wanted to group this because these are more foundational stages for what's to follow. And I offered here the theme is I want to try. This is the transition from the world of home into the world of peers, finding heroes to identify with. Puberty brings hormonal changes and reactions. Strong desires and emotions govern behavior, at least in the early adolescence and actually all the way through. Exploring physical and social boundaries, intense search for identity, asking who am I? School and organized activities frame the experience. And yes, discovering and experimenting with sex sometime along those ages. So what else would you add? What other thoughts did you have about that stage?
So if I take adolescence and I kind of break it down instead of into 3, if I break it into 2, Aviv, and you can use my feedback however you want, but in early adolescence, you said here exploring. I think that at some point the person begins to establish, it's not just exploring, they actually begin to establish their own physical and social boundaries. And those physical and social boundaries become sacrosanct to them. And they don't want anybody to, they don't want to be told they're wrong, and they don't want anybody to try to impinge on them. And I think that a lot of the arguing that can happen with kids when you get to that age is because as a parent, you've got a much broader view. The kid is like, okay, this is who I am, and this is my boundary. So I think the concept of establishing their own is very important. I also think in early adolescence, the other thing that happens is that the kids begin to question religious and spiritual boundaries and precepts that have been laid down for them. So, we talked early about this burgeoning sense of right and wrong. We talked about the person becoming aware of the larger cosmos. Well, if they've had adults around them espousing philosophy or religion, just like a young person is going to set their own social boundary and their own physical boundary, they may be wanting to set their own spiritual boundaries as well. And again, don't want to be told that they're wrong or have anybody impinge on them. So I think that that is, to me, a feature of that early adolescent stage.
Yes, very much so. And the other dimension we ought to bring into this is, so we're trying to trace here some of the more permanent characteristics of each of those stages.
Mm-hmm.
There is the other dimension, which is how is it different to be an adolescent today, to 20 years ago, to 40 years ago, to 100 years ago. And one thing we could say is the adolescent of 40 or 50 years ago in some of the developing countries all around the world was closer in nature to the adolescence of their parents. These days, they are closer in nature to the adolescence of their peers in the West. Now, we are going now through massive change throughout the world. Still, I think that stands. Just to capture the emphasis you bring, which is what you call that establishing, yes, very much so, to the sense of identity, to the sense of who I am, in which there are all those aspects. The definition of who I am in terms of my physical boundaries, my social boundaries, my beliefs, my way, my style, my sexuality is something that wasn't pronounced when we were in that stage, but is very pronounced today. So we could simply look at it in terms of saying the spectrum of the range of self-identity, of defining who you are and what you're about, expanded. And very much the orange is about the expansion of your discovery of who you are and the establishment of who you are, at least preliminary, as you will transition then into young adult years.
Right. So one thread that I want to take from this into later adolescence is the impact that technology and digitization has had on that development. So as a young adult, as an adolescent, I should say, you are shaped by your nuclear family. You may be shaped by your schoolmates, but in today's environment, children can be playing games with kids halfway across the world. And so part of what happens with digitization and technology is the world becomes a smaller place. So the impact of family and elders could be more minimal than we've appreciated, simply because kids are able to connect so much more easily to one another. And so I think that, we talk about the nature of development. I think that we're in uncharted territory these years because of the way in which technology is interleaved into those kids' lives. So then when you begin, if you accept the fact that the kids that are 9 to 21, started becoming inured to technology much earlier, then in later adolescence, what does that really mean? So one of the things that I wrote down for later adolescence was the actual rejection of physical and social boundaries that exist. You talked about an intense search for identity. I think that when I think about when I was 21, that's pretty much when I started to establish myself firmly outside of my nuclear family. I think that's happening a lot earlier now. So what we see is in later adolescence, kids who are younger and maybe they think they're equipped, but they are not, are trying to establish themselves more firmly outside of their nuclear family. So development is different.
Well, so
as a result of that.
Let me try and thread through some of what you said there, because the challenge for the inquiry is to actually see these different overlays and see them firstly, individually, be able to differentiate them and then see them in the aggregate. Because technology is indeed a powerful catalyst. What we're trying to differentiate is technology will change how we experience, is changing how we are experiencing the world, how the child, how the adolescent is experiencing the world. And yet at the same time, certain characteristics of the age, such as the formative influence of authority. So what you actually are describing is that the fragmentation of authority has been accelerated by technology and the cultural shift. But the child at age 12, 13, 14, 15, the adolescent rather, they are highly influenced by the search for heroes they can identify with. Mm-hmm. They just find their heroes now in different sources, not in the tribal, the family context, but in a variety of other cultural assets online. You and I may find those desirous or not. We may appreciate these or not. I'm interested that we should be able to look at the natural development of what occurs in those stages, and then how in the context of through the shifts in cultural development and evolution, the experience may be shifting, even though it is still using those core features, which is at age 12, 13, 14, 15, that young adolescent is looking at the world around him or her, and they're making, they are exploring and looking to discover where they can thrive, where they can succeed, where they can find safety, well-being, sense of self. All those are experiences that are part of the jigsaw puzzling of the forming and the fashioning of that first identity. And every interaction online or within the real world, though for them online is the real world, as it is for us, I suppose you could say, just they don't differentiate. They don't see the difference because they were born into it. So the other point you made, therefore, is that the various processes are accelerated to show up early in life. Mm-hmm. And I think the trade-off is other processes are delayed. Certain decisions that you needed to conclude and crystallize in your early 20s can now be delayed to late 20s or early 30s. Mm-hmm. So that's part of how we are processing differently these times. So let's do one more. Let's do the yellow, the 21 to 32, what we call young adult, where we say, let me experiment and experience. I'm going to beat the system. We talk here about that sense of, okay, I am now leaving home. I'm no longer just going to be inside the world that my parents created for me. I'm now beginning to carve my own space. I'm developing my own freedom and responsibility, testing myself on the world stage, choosing the direction, the opportunities I will pursue, earning money, exploring career opportunities, cultivating relationships, love, and starting a family, buying sometime first home these days, later into your 20s or into 30s. And you may say this generation may delay that very much, but lots of rapid development and discoveries. And again, here, there is a difference between the 21 to 24, 25 to the late 20s, sometime in the Western context, when you graduated from whatever university you went to, and now you're making your plunge into the world. So what are some comments that you'll offer from your observations to that age?
So I agree with what you wrote. I think that one of, and maybe it's an overlay, and I think an overlay for many developing countries is that this is the first generation that will not earn as much money as their parents. So while they are trying to experience adult freedom and responsibility, many of them do not have the economic means to do so. And so what I don't know is, does that retard any of their development? I don't know. But I do know that it is a very common theme, at least amongst my daughter and her friends. Many of them did not have a reasonably well-paying job until they were in their late 20s. And so even though they graduated from college and, you know, they weren't terrible students, they were maybe working several part-time jobs and maybe even living at home for a much longer period of time. And I think that that creates a lot in this generation, creates a lot of angst and stress, because they look at their parents and they know that their parents were largely self-sufficient by a certain point in time, and they are not. So that is one aspect that I don't know if we need to include that or not. I would say the other thing is, two more points. One is that from a spirituality perspective, this is when I begin to see that people want to give back. So you will find that, you know, this young adult will want to guide younger people, whether it's from a spiritual perspective or actually religiously. So this is the first time they're not just taking, they're actually giving back in terms of guidance and mentorship. And then the third thing, Aviv, is that at some point along the way, it's possible that in the later stages of the young adult, they begin to realize that they need to keep developing themselves. So up until then, I think it's like, I'm on the path, I'm on the trail, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. Okay, now what?
Yeah.
Okay, now what? And why am I not where I want to be? And so what does develop? So I think that that's the kind of the beginning stages of what does it mean to keep developing yourself?
Well, which is a beautiful segue to make the following point. And I'll be the first to admit and point to the limitation of this somewhat two-dimensional framework, because the age that we are showing here is merely your chronological or biological age. When we talk about development, and some of what you just alluded to points to very quickly to the realization that, yes, there is the chronological biological age, but then there are different lines of maturation. There is emotional maturation, there is mental maturation, there is spiritual maturation. So if you brought spiritual, I'd say that we could say that the early stages here, right at the time of birth, you and the cosmos is one thing, even though the birthing itself is the first separation. Because in the womb, you were one with that experience. Birth is being rejected by the mother, metaphorically speaking, to be born to the greater mother, which is planet Earth and the universe at large. You leave one womb, which is the womb of your 9 months formation, and you enter the womb of the world in which you will form yourself along your journey. So here you are still one with the cosmos, and through the childhood years, you are still to a large extent tethered to, these days, less so. You get the rude awakening earlier, but still in the early childhood, there is this innocence that carries no self-awareness of the separating kind. And what appears then with the separation is that what we describe at the end of the childhood and the beginning of adolescence is the urgent need to define myself, to discover who I am. Mm-hmm. And what you started to describe as the spiritual nature of wanting to give back, I would say there is another layer that appears, and it can appear in the late adolescence, and sometimes throughout the 20s into young adult, which is why I'm saying those lines and stages of development, they show up in different synchronization at different people. And what I'm alluding to is specifically the spiritual inquiry, the inquiry to understand this cosmos, to understand what is this? What is life all about? Is this about making money? Is there more to making money? Is it about building relationships? Is it about what is it about? The search for meaning, the search for purpose, the search for how do I and the world, how do I and other people, how is this evolving map can be placed inside a bigger map of meaning that I can experience, that I can trust, that I can believe. You could say that so many of the philosophical, spiritual frameworks that are offered there, they are a result of the inquiry that emerged at those stages, at those early years where you essentially said, I have to figure out what is this all about? I'm a child in the universe, and it's for me to figure out the truth about that. And we also see for many in the young adult years, the beginning and the end, the death of that inquiry, because they succumb, they surrender to a framework or to a belief that they must chase one thing or another or a different kind of success. And essentially they now become operators inside a system that they embraced, rather than giving themselves permission to challenge, to inquire, to even dare believe they may be able to create for themselves their own paradigm. And all that turmoil and friction is mounting in the mid-20s through to the early 30s. I remember the last year of university, I asked my son, he was then, 24, 25. So what's it like now for your friends? And he said, many are a little bit depressed at the moment. And I said, why? And he said, well, people are realizing now that they have reached a crossroad. You're either going to begin to act on your visions and dreams for yourself, in which case we will discover what we can do and we can't do, or you're going to preserve the sanctity of your dream in a fantasy form, such that you will not actually rub with life to try to actualize it, and it will stay as a distant echo in your thoughts, but it will remain pure because you never actually try to confront life with that. And he made his choice and decided to go and build one business, and that led him to try to do that for the second and third time until he became successful. So there is a rude awakening that occurs in the childhood phase as you come through the 7 to 9, 10, 11, 12. There is a different awakening that occurs in the late 20s, early 30s. For many, it's the sense of, I have to now take the responsibilities of, I have a family, I have a child, I have responsibilities at work, all of those elements. And for many, this is in the journey of life, the low point in terms of the degree of stress, because they feel like they have not had a fair chance to fully realize or have a go in terms of the dreams and imaginations that they've had for themselves at their late 20s, and the world never gave them that full arena to play in. And then you have those that are determined to create for themselves the arena, whether it's in the entrepreneurial space or in the relational space or the spiritual inquiry space. And that tension is the central character of the mid to late 20s, and how you choose to resolve that tension in yourself.